Hello and welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and with me today is an old friend of mine, Mr. Tom Thiel, who is a Korean veteran. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born?
Ohio, Buckeye.
Oh, Buckeye.
Raised on a farm that had log walls, actually. And graduated from high school in 1946. And that was just after all the hostilities ended in World War II. And the draft was lagging. In fact, the draft stopped, and I thought,
They're not going to bother you.
not going to bother me. And I sure wasn't going to volunteer for the military. So, lo and behold, these critters from North Korea came across on June 25th, 1950. And very soon I got a letter signed by Mr. Truman that said, "Greetings. You've been selected by your friends and neighbors to represent them in the armed forces.
Congratulations.
Show up at the courthouse November 22nd, the day before Thanksgiving, 1950. And I did. There were, I think, 5 or 6 of us. We boarded a bus, went to Toledo, got sworn in, got on a train, went to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky, which is just below Evansville, Indiana. And my life changed. Mainly it changed because I met kids from Hammond, Gary, Chicago, East Chicago, and that wasn't my lifestyle, let me tell you. When I grew up on the farm, it wasn't that at all. Anyhow, the basic went okay. Everybody asked me my experiences in basic, and the one I remember most is when I did combat in cities or towns. And what we were doing was, the objective of the game was your buddy would position himself below the window of this house, and I'm to come along and put my foot on his back, and he springs me up and I go into the window and do my duty with the M1. Well, it came my turn. It wasn't even my company. That's kind of a side story I won't go into. But I didn't know the kids that I was with. And when I went to do this, I had mud on my boots, and I came up and I hit this guy, and he just collapsed. And I went sailing into the window, and there was all kinds of cursing and things like that going on around me. So that's what I remember of basic. In the basic, I get a couple weeks leave, catch a plane in Columbus, and end up in Camp Stoneman, California. Had never been on a train, plane, bus, ship. Had never stayed in a hotel.
So you were on a tractor, though, right?
I drove tractors.
Yeah.
So this is 12 weeks of basic, and I'm now on the William Weigel going to Japan. Everybody's sick, including me, and I found out what all the 55-gallon drums were for.
The Wiggle Waggle, is that the name of the ship?
Mitchell. I'm sorry if I said the Weigel, it's a Mitchell. William Mitchell.
Oh, the William Mitchell.
And that's a ship that I was on.
Yeah, okay.
And so I dock in Yokohama and spend a couple days there, board a smaller ship, and sail around to Incheon Harbor. Mm-hmm. And Incheon is the place where the Marines and the 7th Division landed in the fall, September of 1950. And they went ashore relatively easily and cut off the North Korean army, which had us all collapsed in the south end of Korea, in what was known as the Pusan perimeter down by the city of Pusan. Anyhow, I went into Incheon. It was cleared, but I could still hear artillery shells or artillery pieces when we landed. And I remember going into Incheon, went on board a landing craft because of the shallow harbor we got off onto a floating dock and then into a landing craft and then went aboard, and of course the front drops down. It's not a hot landing. We get on board a Korean train, and I end up there's still 3 of us from our basic training company.
Now this is all with the 24th, right?
I'm still not really, I'm just being a replacement at this stage.
Oh, so you're not technically assigned?
I go there for a week,
Uh-huh.
spend a week in training, which I call my week of hell.
Yeah.
I mean, basically,
Didn't like camp?
they made you so miserable while you were there that if you were gone anywhere to get away from it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm assigned along with 2 of my friends from basic to Easy Company, 19th Infantry,
19th,
18th
okay.
Infantry Regiment, 24th Infantry Division. 24th was the first one in originally. And they lost a lot of men, but not as many as the 7th Division. Anyhow, I'm assigned to Easy Company, and we go up with a carrying party. And I have one of my photographs is of a Korean carrying party. They brought everything up to the hill. And when I refer to the hill, I mean literally a hill, maybe even the mountain. That's where we lived when we were online. So I went up with the carrying party. They were bringing up food and PX rations and a few things like that. And when I got up there at the top, there was some milling about. It was not an active combat place at the time. I mean, nothing was happening. And the sergeant wanted to know if anybody had experience with mortars, 60mm mortars, and I want my friends to go with me, and they didn't want to do that. So when he asked for a recurve rifle, I put my hand up, and they went on into rifle companies. And so I got a new batch of friends, and they became my family. And I remember that day was nice and sunny. I remember lots of things about it, but some of them are too much detail, I think. Like everybody wanted the orange juice and the aqua velvet, and I found out that they made their drinks out of it.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise. I told you I was naive.
Yeah.
Anyhow, they told me, Tom, this is going to be your foxhole. We're going to live on the other side of the hill, but this is your foxhole. And we were in kind of a, what had happened was we had gotten driven all the way back to Pusan at the beginning of the war. MacArthur had the idea for the invasion in August or 15th, I think it was, at Incheon. They cut off the North Koreans. Everybody that was condensed down there now moved north to the 38th parallel. This is November, August, September, October, and they decided to go all the way to the Yalu, which separates North Korea from China and North Korea from Russia. And I think that was a horrible mistake because I think it made a big, the difference was that when they got within sight of the Yalu, 500,000 Chinese joined in the battle. And now it became a different war. And I never saw a North Korean that I know of. My experiences was with all Chinese People's Volunteers. And I remember they told me on that day I first arrived that this would be my foxhole, and they told me to go in it. I don't remember too much about it, except I remember one thing really well. I was there standing in a hole that was about to my waist deep, so my upper body was exposed. And all of a sudden, right past my ear, went a slug. Never heard the rifle, so he must have been a long ways away. And I said to myself, you're here, you better take care of yourself.
Yeah.
and I learned to live in Mother Earth. I remember lots of things about that. The guy that joined that platoon, that group with me, went on patrol with some people, and almost, I think the next day after we got there, and nobody ever knew why, but he walked into a minefield, clearly marked, clearly told that it was a minefield, and I got his carbine, which meant that I didn't have to carry an M1 and an ammo pack. So that's sort of where we got started, and I got indoctrinated into that pretty fast. I remember leaving there and going north somewhat. We're in the general vicinity of Chuncheon, South Korea, just below the 38th parallel in the central part of the country. I actually never got more than probably 20 miles away from that area, general area between Chuncheon and Kumsong. And so I remember the first dead people I saw, Chinese. These were Chinese. And they must have been 3 and 4 deep, laying where they fell. And this was all battles that had taken place just days before I got there. And I remember that same period, we're walking along a river, and it's hot, and we take a break, and some of the guys take their boots off, and they're in the water. I think that was the same day that I saw the first GI casualties. There were 2 laying on a Jeep, each on a litter. And to see dead people that have been killed, was
traumatic.
It weighs on you. It weighs on you.
Mm-hmm. Especially what, you're what, like 18, 19 years old now?
I'm 20.
You're 20.
I'm 20. I haven't quite gotten to 21 yet. And I was telling you about that river that we're sitting next to. And this is in the same vicinity where I saw these Chinese bodies. All of a sudden, across the river, 20 yards away, it was tall grass, and the whole thing changed in complexion from the grass to people standing with their arms up, Chinese standing with their arms up. And we must have taken thousands that day. I took 8 myself. They had been searched. And I was so impressed. They seemed young to me. They seemed very young to me, those did. And so that was kind of my beginning. I've had brush after brush after brush with traumatic events that were far closer than what I mentioned before. It was called the stalemate part of the Korean War. If you read the history of the Korean War, it's almost all about the initial events that occurred in which, to be fairly blunt, we, the Americans and others that were part of the UN, got the crap beat out of us.
Yeah.
We didn't know the enemy, and we weren't prepared for the enemy. In Korea, we had made a conscious decision at the national level to not really include Korea in its defense plans. But Mr. Truman changed that along with Dean Acheson. I think he was Secretary of State at the time, and that's how we got involved. The North Koreans attacked on June 25th. My division, the 21st Regiment of my division, had a task force at Osan, about 50 miles south of Seoul, on the 5th of July, which is the first real action that took place. So from there, they went all the way south, retreated, retreated all the way south. And then I said we went back north. That was kind of uneventful. In fact, going all the way to Yalu was kind of uneventful. But then when the Chinese got involved, they drove us, our division, again on the west coast of Korea, as well as, you've heard of the Frozen Chosen, I'm sure.
Yes, very well.
Yeah, along with your uncle's 7th Infantry Division. We're at the Chosen at this time, about November, January of '50, when the Chinese really hit us in force. And the Chinese didn't confront us head on. They had enough people that they went around and they would come in behind you. And they'd block every pass that you needed to get through to get out. And we lost a lot of men to that kind of action. They were captured, and we lost a lot to frozen events. So then they dropped back down to about the 38th parallel, and that was sort of my war, the stalemate war. At best you get a paragraph of stuff in the history books about the stalemate, but it went on for 3 years, 2.5 years.
So when you say the stalemate, that's kind of where everybody just was, that's it. There was no moving this way or that way, right?
Right. But we would periodically take off and take 5 miles and get a lot of people shot up, and then pull out and come back, sometimes to the same places we left. I don't remember the Chinese attacking us, but one time is that I really remember. I remember October and November of 1951. I had survived a number of these 1-week adventures up and back. We would go into combat action, and what you do is you'd have the rifle platoons leading the way, and we would follow, and then when they got stalemated, generally by a machine gun, it would be our job to come up and try to take that out with our weapons, our 57s, or our rocket launchers, which is what our job was. And in October of 1951, we entered something called Operation Nomad. I'd say the 24th Division, along with 2 ROK Republic of Korea divisions. And our goal there was more serious. I think it was several goals. We'd now been in peace talks 8 months or something like that, and they weren't going anywhere. And we were ordered to take the vicinity of Kumsong, which is a rail yard. It's just slightly north, probably 20, 30 miles north of the 38th parallel now. And I think it's in the demilitarized zone now, because if I look on the Korean map, I can't see it. But we had orders to take, we went into this overstrength at about 240 men in our company, easy company. And we were given an objective, a certain hill to take on, I think it was like the 13th of October, 14th of October. And we got stalemated, and they brought in the Air Force to help us out. Well, they started, let me just say that I know what it is like to be able to read the lettering on a napalm bomb and feel the heat when it comes off. And my friend was on the other ridge line. It was closer to him than it was to me. And he went into a bunker that they had just captured, a Chinese bunker, and he had to take all his gear off to get out. So that was that day. We lost one man up there. I remember being called up that day. because we went up to, 2 fingers, and then it went up as the ridge on up the hill. And these would be like 700 meters or something like that tall. It's kind of like Tennessee and not anything you see south of there in terms of terrain.
Yeah.
And we were ordered up to take out that machine gun nest, the same one they called the planes in for a little bit later. Anyhow, I just remember seeing the foliage melt as we were trying to get into position. And I had that a couple times. You know, you're trying to get into position to fire your weapon, and it gets pretty hot, and sometimes you get out, and sometimes you go ahead and fire. Next day, we're taking another place. Probably the same hill from a different direction. I never knew where I was.
Yeah, there was no
I never had a
maps.
map.
Yeah, no road map signs.
I think our officers and maybe our platoon sergeant might have had a map, but it didn't really help much because it was all ridge lines anyhow. But that day was kind of a tragic day because we had been, our rifle platoon had gotten across the river, and they weren't able to move anymore, and it got late in the day, kind of like 4 o'clock, and we were ordered to withdraw. And when you withdraw, we went back like a mile. And I remember walking through a bit of a soybean patch, and you could see gray puffs of smoke. I don't know what the size of these mortars were, but they were mortars going off. Got through that, and there was a tank covering us and shooting over our heads, covering us, our exit. And I didn't get very far from him, and somebody yelled at me, "Sarge, come and get in the hole with me." And that's the one I wish I could do over. I did that, and the hole wasn't big enough, so we're digging. And I'm down getting a shovelful of dirt, and he's up throwing his out. And probably a 105 millimeter round came in. And I'm here today, and he isn't. And I had several experiences like that. 2 days later, walking a ridge line, shell falls right next to me, right behind a rock outcrop, kills a man behind me, and the 2 in front, one is a litter patient, and the other is walking wounded. Yeah, and I told you I came in with 2 of my buddies from basic training. Mm-hmm. Well, Art Schwind from Bowling Green, Ohio, was part of a rifle platoon, and I could still see the trees. They were not that big, pine grove of some kind, and we're sort of, it's not very dense, and we're strung out. He's probably 100 yards or 150 yards in front of me. And this was one of those events when we went into Chinese held territory and took the territory and then pull out. And you wonder why we did that. But in any event, I loved artillery and I hated artillery. I loved artillery when it kept the enemy away from me. I hated it when it was going over my head very close. And that day they were close, and one didn't make it. And that's when Art lost his life. Told you the other one, Rudy. This was in September, following Nomad. And this is the only time I remember being attacked by Chinese. They always talk about the bugles and the red and green tracers and whistles and pots and pans and noise. That started about dark and lasted all night long. We held our positions, but Rudy was behind me, and we were kind of strung out along the hillside, and so we were dropping back this way, and he was behind me, and supposedly somebody lit a cigarette somewhere near him, and he got hit by a sniper.
Yeah, I've heard that said numerous times about Korea with the frostbite and the colds, and people lighting up a cigarette. It was the worst thing you could do was light up a cigarette.
Well, people ask me, was it worthwhile? What did you achieve? I was like your other guest. It was my job. That's why I went. I never questioned going. And when I was told something, I did it. But I never volunteered to do it either. But I just wanted to say that if, I'm sure you've seen that picture of Korea at night, the satellite picture.
Yes, sir.
At night that we use. And it shows a very lighted South Korea, very bright South Korea, and a very dark North Korea. Panmunjom and maybe one or two other places have lights that are visible at night by satellite. And you sort of take this as an indicator of maybe what we accomplished, because South Korea is bright. South Korea is a free country. Ranks in the top 10 economically. They are now a donor nation rather than a contributor nation, rather than one that needs to be bootstrapped and sorted up and done that way. So I feel like we did, we achieved quite a lot in terms of freedom throughout Asia and throughout the world, because communism sort of folded its tent soon after that.
And may I add to this, my friend, you and I have worked on several projects together, because I am an honorary member of the chapter, and I have seen firsthand the people who've come over here from South Korea and how much the South Korean government appreciates the efforts of people like you and all the other veterans over there that did you really made a difference. And I'm so glad you came home and became a friend of mine. But I don't want to get my friend mad, but I'm out of time.
You're always out of time.
Yeah, I know. You know, we could talk all day. So we have to say goodbye, and hope you'll join me.
I will.
To all our veterans out there, our active military and their families, we salute you for all you do. Till next time. Thanks, buddy. You did a great job.
I did it all the time.